Coming up in our Roundup, imagine having to fight a battle against an entire army of your own AI clones. It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, right? Well, it's happening right now to a university professor, and we are definitely going to get into it. Welcome to the Canadian Research Security Weekly Roundup. This week, we're looking at some really pressing domestic threats. Then we'll get into Canada's big innovation crossroads. After that, we'll zoom out to see what's happening on the global landscape, and we'll finish with a look at the future shock of AI and sovereignty. Okay, let's dive in. So, first up, we're covering threats that are hitting, well, very close to home, from really bizarre cases of stolen tech to actual homegrown weapons development. We're going to start with a pretty wild investigation from the CBC that asks that exact question. I mean, it is a deeply unsettling story that kicks off with what seems like simple intellectual property theft, but it ends up somewhere much, much darker. So this CBC investigation uncovered this bizarre and frankly dangerous trail that all began with the theft of something called, get this, bull semen sexing technology. It's a super high-tech process for the cattle industry to choose the gender of their calves, and it is worth an absolute fortune. As you can see, this whole thing starts way back in 2015. An entrepreneur named Jesse J. Bijou flees BC to dodge these massive court judgments. Then, for years, nothing. The trail goes cold. But now, it's led U.S. authorities to 2 suspected illegal biolabs, all allegedly tied right back to him. You know, this story is a perfect illustration of just how quiet and persistent these threats can be. The investigation follows this incredibly complex trail from what just looked like a corporate crime in a Canadian courtroom all the way to finding potentially hazardous biolabs in the United States. It's a pretty stark reminder of how something like IP theft can escalate into a major public safety concern. And at the same time, a totally different kind of threat popped up in Ontario after a simple trespassing call at Western University. But that call led police to a much bigger discovery: 3 men who were allegedly developing a military-grade anti-drone weapons system. Pitch videos that CBC News got a hold of show this system mounted on a pickup truck designed to take down weaponized drones. And now these guys are facing a whole laundry list of really serious charges, including firearms manufacturing and possession of high explosives. Okay, so from those really specific, on-the-ground threats, let's pull back a bit and look at the big picture of Canada's innovation ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that's seeing some major wins, for sure, but also some very, very serious challenges. This week's news really paints a picture of a nation at a crossroads. You know, on the one hand, you've got these incredible soaring ambitions. Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen getting ready to fly around the moon, universities building new partnerships in India and France. But on the other hand, we're facing these huge hurdles right here at home. Things like major budget cuts and the fact that we still don't have a cohesive national innovation strategy. And if you want to understand the scale of those hurdles, just look at this number. $507 million. That's the total cut to agriculture and Agri-Food Canada over 3 years. And look, this isn't some abstract figure on a spreadsheet. It's forcing research centers to close and has institutions like Université Laval absolutely scrambling to save local agricultural expertise before it just disappears. And you know, these challenges we're facing at home aren't happening in a vacuum. The entire global research scene is shifting. So let's zoom out for a second and see how Canada's situation fits into the wider world. Yeah, the international picture is really complex right now. So you've got the UK, for example, hitting pause on some of its major grants because they want to do fewer things better. And that's got researchers pretty worried. But at the same time, you're seeing these huge partnership moves. The EU is committing over 600 million euros to deepen research ties with Africa, while the UK and Japan are launching massive new collaborations in fields like quantum and life sciences. But maybe the most chilling development is coming out of the United States, and it's summed up perfectly in this powerful quote. It's from a New York Times report that details how professors are facing just unprecedented levels of political pressure and surveillance, which is leading them to self-censor in their own classrooms. It's this growing threat to open inquiry that has researchers completely on edge. And that brings us to our final section, which we're calling Future Shock. Here, we're looking at 2 very different stories that both challenge our most fundamental assumptions, one about identity and the other about sovereignty. All right, first up, that story we promised you at the top. It's a battle being fought not on some distant battlefield, but all across social media platforms against an army of digital duplicates. So, this is the story of American political scientist John Mearsheimer, who suddenly found himself fighting this tidal wave of AI-generated deepfakes. These fakes were using his image, his voice, to spread disinformation in a bunch of different languages. And as this process shows, the fight back is just unbelievably burdensome. His team had to manually find and flag hundreds of videos across dozens of channels, then just wait for the platforms to slowly do something, and then, you guessed it, watch as new fakes popped right back up, starting the whole cycle all over again. So, while we're trying to grapple with these new threats to our digital identities, one final piece this week asks us to think about the very foundation of our national innovation identity. An op-ed in the Hill Times makes the case that a true national innovation strategy just can't succeed without respecting and integrating Indigenous sovereignty and knowledge systems. The author, Jessica Colapeña, highlights the contrast you see right here. Federal policy is obsessed with speed, scale, and attracting mobile talent, but that so often overlooks the deep, place-based, and relational knowledge that is absolutely foundational to Indigenous science and governance. The argument here is pretty clear. For Canada's innovation future to be legitimate and to be truly successful, it has to be built on this foundation. And that really brings us to the ultimate question that kind of ties all of these different stories together. In a world of stolen tech, deepfake clones, and competing knowledge systems, how do we secure our most fundamental asset, our very identity? It's a challenging thought to end a pretty complex week on. That's all for the Roundup. We'll see you next time.